Free drugs. My opponent's offering a free drug plan. Well, that would be a wonderful thing if we could get it for free. Problem is, of course, we'd have to pay for it. So why don't we have one right now? Well, the reason why we don't goes back to the point at which, after many years, after about 17 years of trying, we finally became a union and had the right to have our own welfare fund. And the question was, which welfare fund would we in fact have? Because you see, there was more than one welfare fund, and we were familiar with more than one welfare fund. There is the DC 37 fund, which many people belong to. There's the SSU Local 371 fund, which, although they're a part of DC 37, is separate and apart from the DC 37 fund and has different benefits. On top of that, we had more than a few of our members who had spent some time in the Communication Workers of America, Local 1180, and thus had experience with their welfare fund. Further, we had people coming from 237 Teamsters, and indeed, they too had their own welfare fund. Then again, we also had the Management Benefits Fund, which kind of like all of us had had some experience with, because once we became analysts, so we were automatically placed into that fund and out of whatever other fund we had been in before, so we got used to those benefits, and they were different also. So we had 5 different plans with 5 different sets of benefits to look at. The one thing we knew we could not do was take the best elements of each plan and combine them together to make one spectacular plan, because all these plans got the same amount of money and they spent the money on their members. So you couldn't just take the best elements of each one, because you come up with a plan you couldn't begin to afford with the money you were receiving. So we had to figure out which plan we wanted to model, not just pick the best of each. Well, that took more than a little bit of time. We had 2 different membership meetings about it and a lot of discussion in between, and people looking at different plans and analyzing them and trying to figure out, so which is good and which isn't good and what's better and what's worse. We finally decided to keep the Management Benefits Fund. And the reason why we decided to keep the Management Benefits Fund was because there was a consensus that we didn't want to give up any of the nicer benefits that we had already gotten used to. And they did have better dental, and they did have better eyeglasses, and they did have something called the Superimposed Major Medical, which served as a wonderful catastrophic plan. And they had other nice benefits as well. They had more generous life insurance. They had many good things. They didn't happen to have drugs as such, but they were otherwise a pretty nice plan, and we liked it. So we finally decided, as a sort of consensus, that we would try to match the Management Benefits Fund. Now, keep in mind, I said try. When we were doing this, we were only going to have 650 people in the union, and we were just a trifle scared about economies of scale, because we were going to be awfully small, and we had not previously had an awful lot of experience running a welfare fund, so there is some doubt in our own minds at that time that we could actually do it and do it successfully. I will give a lot of credit to a fellow named Jim Paul, who was the head of the Management Benefit Fund. He was a very nice man, and he took a liking to me, and he gave me a lot of his hours and a lot of his instructions about what they were doing and who they were using for vendors and how they did it, and I greatly appreciate his help to me at that time. However, as it turns out, over a period of years, we were able to match the Management Benefits Fund. And then something strange happened. Back in the 1980s, the cost of drugs wasn't very extreme, but it grew and grew and grew year after year. You might get as much as 3% inflation in the outside world and 18% in drugs. And the next year might be only 2% in the outside world and 15% in drugs. But they kept outpacing inflation dramatically. And this meant that any union which already had a drug plan had trouble sustaining it financially. So the major unions would go back to the city and say, okay, in the next contract, take some of the money which otherwise might be going for salaries and put it into benefits, because we simply can't afford this plan the way it is, and we're going to have to make changes in it anyway. And they did. They made a lot of changes over the years. But we need more money to sustain it, even with the changes. And so the drug plans not only changed, but it also became more expensive. But each time that happened, the organization staff analysts and the Management Benefit Fund got the same amount of money, like an extra $100 a year. And in each case, we couldn't exactly put a drug plan in for $100 a year, nothing like it, but we could improve the other benefits we had. And so we did. So your $30,000 life insurance policy became a $50,000 life insurance policy. And your catastrophic benefit, which had a higher deductible, soon had a lower deductible. And when it had a lower rate of reimbursement, it got to be a higher rate of reimbursement. And our dental climbed eventually to $4,000 a year, and implants and everything else you could imagine, all kinds of bells and whistles, and a really good plan, better than everybody else's, because as the extra money came in, that's where we put the money. My opponent is now saying she's going to give you a free plan. Well, that'll cost the welfare fund approximately anywhere from $1,000 to $1,300 per person, per member rather. We currently, last year, had a tiny deficit. It was tiny. Every other year before this, we've had surpluses, but because of the giving out of the $500 and so forth and so on, we have a tiny deficit for last year, but there's no way we have $1,300 lying around anywhere loose, or $1,000 either. And that means that the only way that drugs could be free is if you either cut the other benefits, and that would be very unpopular, and I don't think that would fly with the membership. They like what they're used to getting, and they want to keep getting that. Or you start to use up the reserves. But the problem there is the reserves don't go on forever. We get good reserves. We're proud of our reserves. It does take into account the possibility of something surprising happening, and we have to be able to react to it. But if we use them up, they'll be gone. And once they're gone, checks can begin to bounce. And since my opponent is not only giving free drugs, she's also coming up with a whole bunch of other benefits. As fast as she thinks of them, she puts them in there. She could get free legal benefits, she could get free this, she could get free that, all kinds of free stuff, as well as a free drug plan. And the problem is, it won't be free. It won't be free at all. And it's remarkably imprudent, unwise, and unresponsible to go around promising such things, when the result, if you actually put them into effect, would eventually be checks that would bounce when they hit the bank. This is no way to try to run a business, a ship, or a union. You should try to be honest and straight with your members and say, there are things we can afford, and there are things we can't afford. And we'll do the very best we can with the things we can afford. And that's what we've been doing.